Welcome back to the Rock Your Comeback podcast. I'm your host, Nichole Eaton, and today I'm here with Dr. Kelly Kessler. She's a physical therapist, transformation coach, host of the Rewiring podcast, and owner of Optimal You Health and Wellness. And we're going to talk today about perfectionism, chronic pain. We're going to talk about all the things that come along with being a stressed out woman. So welcome, Kelly.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Too. I'm so curious because I deeply believe people get into the helping field because they have had to figure out something on their own to help themselves out. And I don't usually typically dive right into people's stories, but I really want to know yours.
Yeah, absolutely. So you're completely right. I never foresaw my journey coming this way, but it's like it found me and found my purpose, found myself. So it started really from a lot of beliefs that I held throughout my life that I wasn't even aware of until I started actually healing myself. But it manifested in many ways throughout my life. And now looking back, I see how everything was intertwined. But really, my story started in my late teens, early 20s when I struggled with an eating disorder. And it was that constant pursuit of perfection, feeling like I was never good enough, trying to mold my body in a way that I would finally feel fulfilled. And that theme then carried on throughout my life. And even though I overcame the eating disorder in my mid-20s, it still stuck with me that like, I'm not good enough. I have to constantly seek more and more validation externally to feel like I'm enough. And so that continued, and I kept grinding harder, I went for my bachelor's, got my master's, got my doctorate. And that stress that I put myself under on all those terms kept showing up. And then I experienced chronic back pain in my mid-20s and had that for years and still didn't realize that what was going on, like what was causing that. So I addressed it mechanically, tried to do all the things. I'm a physical therapist, trying to do all the things I knew, and it never actually relieved. And then that continued on. I had my first child. We were building a house. Everything was just complete chaos. And this was literally right before the pandemic. And I was experiencing I was experiencing panic attacks over and over and over again, could not sleep at night, just had constant stress. And I realized there was like a moment when I had, it was during the pandemic, I had been furloughed from my job. My husband had been furloughed from his job. We had a 9-month-old at the time. And I remember just sitting on the floor, and there was that like moment I felt like I can't live like this anymore. Like I felt like externally, it seemed like I had my whole life together. Like I painted such a perfect picture of everything is fine. I was achieving all these things. It looked great, but inside I was suffering so much to accomplish all that and hold it all together. And I was not honoring myself. And it was really in this moment that I realized like, I'm not even present for my own son, that it made me realize I have to do something. And that's where it started. And it's an evolution of where I am today, but it's constantly recognizing these beliefs that I held about myself and really working through them and addressing all that and getting to the point where I am today, where I'm not held down by those beliefs and no longer experiencing chronic back pain. I don't have panic attacks. I don't experience an eating disorder. All the physical symptoms were relieved after I started working through that.
Thank you so much for being so vulnerable about all the different experiences that come along with that, because I think a lot of people, especially in this day and age, we have a lot of perfectionistic with social media and just this illusion of things being put together. And it's so hard to uphold that illusion and feel how you're feeling on the inside. And I think that's an important thing to point out, is that there's this discrepancy, and the more you feel that differentiation between where you want to be and what you're portraying and who you are and how you're feeling on the inside, it creates more and more and more anxiety. And so when you're not honoring your truth, you get into this place where it's like a constant anxiety, and yours manifested as chronic pain. And I think this is something that people need to hear, is that chronic pain is associated with anxiety, but it's also associated with living outside of your truth. And I'm like, I just want to hear more about this, because I think there's so many people right now listening who have dealt with chronic pain, and I would put fibromyalgia in that category. I'm not sure if you would as well. I'm not a professional on pain disorders, but I've noticed that the people who come to me who are like, I've been diagnosed with this, and this, I'm like, oh man, because you have so much stress in your life and you perpetuate stress in your life. So yeah, I'd love to hear you speak on that.
Yeah, you're 100% correct. And that was the thing that really got me because I have the training of a physical therapist. My husband is a physical therapist. I did everything I could think of that like would try to relieve my back pain. And I'm like, again, I'm in my mid to late 20s. I'm like, why am I experiencing back pain this early in life? Like, and there's a lot of fear around that. Like, am I going to live like this the rest of my life? And so I did manipulations, heat, ice, stim. I mean, you name it, everything that you would usually do to relieve back pain. And I would get a little bit of relief, but it would come right back. And I started noticing that as my stress levels heightened, my pain heightened as well. So I was starting to see patterns of stress and the pain I was experiencing. And so that's what I'm like, there's got to be more to this. And, we learn a lot about the nervous system in PT school. I'm like, I know there's more to this. And I really experienced it in my life is the minute I started addressing and honoring my needs, being more my authentic version of myself and not trying to show the world this perfected, curated version, and really learning to embrace all the imperfections that I have and really show myself compassion, it's like things started to release. And it was like a gradual process. I'm like, oh my gosh, I don't feel so bad anymore. And it's like, even, it's not like there's a switch and things get better. It's like, even stress levels in my life today, like I'll notice physical symptoms and I'm like, okay, I take it as a message, like you need to start taking care of yourself a little bit more. So it does present as messages that we need to receive rather than this is good or this is bad. And if we can start to honor our needs and recognize that this chronic pain or whatever you're experiencing, physical symptoms, digestive issues, skin conditions, whatever it is, there can be a lot of things that are tied directly to the nervous system. And our nervous system will present itself in the way that it does. And it's very individualistic, but we have to start recognizing the root cause of things rather than just address the symptoms.
I love that you said digestive issues, skin issues, because I think that a lot of people are having these weird things that are popping up and not associating that all with mental health, anxiety, anything like that, or our nervous system. So there's so many studies out there that prove that our nervous system is so correlated with how our body functions. And so if you're somebody at home listening and you're like, man, I've had this skin issue forever, or I've had, it's funny, just on a personal note, I've had issues with just acne and skin issues.
Yeah.
I went to Italy for a week. My skin cleared up. I felt so light, and I've been able to maintain that since I've got back. I've not done anything different. I just think having that time and that respite after such a busy season in my life, like cleared that right up. And it's so silly and simple, but we don't correlate it. And sometimes we're trying to treat a symptom to a much larger problem. So I love that we're talking about this because especially for women and especially for moms, I feel there's just this like go, go, go energy and the expectation and role that we play where we don't even notice our emotions or how we're feeling about things until we get knocked out by a physical ailment.
100%. Yeah. And it really is, society rewards these external go, go, go things. It's like, oh, you're such a good mom. You do this, this, and this. You're constantly taking care of your kids. It's like, those are the things that are acknowledged. And if you're a working mom, it's like, wow, you can run a business and take care of your kids. Like those are the things that are acknowledged. But do you ever hear someone saying, wow, you took a moment for yourself and honored your own needs? Man, way to go. Like, it's just, the messages that we receive subconsciously, like we are not honoring ourselves and we have this expectation that we have to show up 100% in every aspect of our life. And we can do it for so long, but what's the cost of that? Everything has a cost. And if we don't start recognizing the cost that's happening within us internally, whether it's our mental, emotional, physical, or spiritual health, then we are really going to sacrifice ourselves in the long run.
So for somebody listening who's saying, this is me, like I hear you, this is me, I may be a perfectionist or I may be living a life that feels separate from the way that I'm showing people, or I've got all this chronic pain. What's a first step for somebody who's at least able to recognize something's off here?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the first thing really is just that awareness, because we can go on autopilot for so long because that is our baseline. And for especially high achieving perfectionists, your baseline is go. So it can feel very uncomfortable to take a moment just to pause and really sit with yourself. But I would challenge anyone, just take a moment if you are feeling overwhelmed, burnout, whatever it is, if you're feeling tense, take a moment to just sit with how you're feeling and bring awareness to it without saying that's bad, that's good. Don't give judgment to it. Just have a neutral awareness to it. That's the first thing. So, and then start recognizing patterns in your life. Like when you're feeling stressed, what's your first go to? Is it scrolling on your phone? Is it going to do the dishes, keeping yourself busy? Are you jumping on the TV to kind of avoid it? Is it a drink of wine? Like, what is your first go to when you are experiencing that stress in your life? So, those are the big things. Just start bringing awareness to how you're feeling and recognize the patterns in your life and what are your mechanisms that you're using to deal with those. And then once you have that awareness, now you can start to dive in a little bit deeper into how can you change this. Another thing is recognize the internal dialogue that you have in your head. So if you can slow down for a moment and take a moment to even write down what you're thinking and then ask yourself, is this serving me? Because we often get stuck in this rumination of negativity in our heads and can't escape it. And if we can just take a moment, write that down, get it out of our head, that's also a huge part in starting the process of moving forward.
I think there's a lot to be said about limiting beliefs when it comes to pain and having it be forever. You
Yeah.
know, so I talk about this in my latest book, Rock Your Comeback, but I talked about how I got diagnosed with depression when I was like 21, and they're like, this is genetic. You're going to have this forever. And I just remember like, these are professionals. These are somebody who like knows better. And I think there are a lot of physicians right now, not everybody, there's some incredible physicians in the world, but there are a lot of physicians who get paid by the insurance to throw a label on it. And that's honestly the only way they get paid is to throw a label on it. And that label serves as a limiting belief for a lot of people. And so this is a good reminder, is that if you are experiencing some form of pain or ailment, to be mindful of the limiting beliefs you have about how it has to be experienced, how long it has to be experienced, and what that looks like. Because I think that for a lot of people with pain, and obviously pain is pervasive and awful, and it's hard to think of anything else when you're in it. But this is just a good reminder. I love this, so that we can start deconstructing some beliefs about having the pain itself and what that means and what that looks like. I also love that you were talking about coping mechanisms. So for somebody who's like gut instinct is to grab a glass of wine or to start scrolling on TikTok, or at the time I was just thinking about this, when I was in that state of depression, I would just complain about it to everybody who would listen. And that was kind of a coping mechanism, just to constantly be talking about it. For somebody who can recognize like, ooh, maybe these coping mechanisms that I'm choosing aren't helping me. How can they change that around or shake that up?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is just recognize how you feel after you do those things. So if it is scrolling on social media or grabbing a glass of wine, if you can just sit with your emotions, like, are you feeling a release from that? Or are you feeling just like the same that you were? And so a big thing is for me that brought me so much clarity was looking at the energy scale. So if you're feeling like shame, guilt, fear, that's going to be in your low energy vibes. But if you can look at elevating your energy and getting to a higher vibration where you're feeling some peace, some harmony, some freedom in that, you want to try to move yourself up that scale. And so if you're using avoidance techniques like social media, like drinking alcohol or whatever it is, you're not going to be consciously, intentionally elevating your energy. So that's the first thing, is just look at what are you doing. But after that, how can you start to move your energy in a better place where you're not focusing on that? And I like how you talk about the complaining, because complaining, criticism, those C's that we always get back into, or comparison, the 3 C's are the biggest drains of our energy. But it is so easy to get into those patterns. But we need to start recognizing things that we can elevate our energy. So moving through the body and using the mind are really huge tools that we can use. So I do a lot of like breath work. If I'm feeling anxious, I use my body, do breath, do some tapping. I get outside, change my environment, use the visual system. So there's a lot of tools we can use physically, but then with our mind, the biggest thing that we can do is just recognize things that we're grateful for. That's one of the biggest tools for elevating our energy, is just look for the smallest thing. Maybe it's just a cup of tea that will help elevate the energy in that moment. So it's not going to be like you start out and everything's going to be changed, but if you can start making those little things to replace those habits and not feel a void, your system's going to start moving in a direction to elevate itself.
Yeah. Oh, and I have a lot of clients who have talked about like doom scrolling as like a coping mechanism, and how like easily time is wasted. And if you guys don't know this, if you have an Apple or an iPhone, you can set screen times or app limits to the things that you do the most. So you can kind of curb that a little bit and have it just shut off on you. You can even do it with text messaging. If you're like, after, an hour or whatever, I'm not going to do that. Or after this time of night, I'm not going to do that. You can set yourself up for success in like small little ways by at least recognizing, ooh, this is something I do a lot, and I don't feel like I currently have the willpower to stop doing that. Here's something that could help me. So there's ways around these things that you're doing that you can find a little substitute or a way to limit it that's going to help you out. Because I'm all for making things easy. I don't have time in my day to make things complicated. So I like to find little life hacks that are going to help me out, make it easy. So I love these tips. And I think I also love that you said that this isn't like an overnight thing. You don't just re-regulate your nervous system with one moment of breath work.
Exactly.
How long do you think it takes, or what do you think it takes to really, truly get to a place where your nervous system is in a better spot?
Yeah, I think it depends on where you're starting. If you're someone who's had a lot of complex trauma, have dealt with maybe chronic pain for years on end, it can take a longer process because your brain has been wired in a certain way. And those wirings have been they've become very strong. The more you live with that, the more you resonate with that, the more you think about that. So it really depends on where you are in the process. But the beautiful thing about the brain is that it's neuroplastic. So there's constantly an ability to change it based on the inputs that you give to it. So if you start small and you do the smallest thing you can possible and you be consistent with that, you're going to start seeing evidence. And the brain loves evidence. Once it sees that it's feeling a little bit different, now you're no longer relying on willpower to change the brain. It's actually going to feel that you're going to feel momentum in that process. So it's not going to feel like you have to really work at it as much. You're actually going to enjoy the things that you start bringing into your life, but consistency is huge. So the big thing is clarity. First of all, where do you want to be? Because a lot of people lack clarity and they become that boat without an engine that the waves are just crashing into and push it any which direction. But when you have clarity, there's a destination you want to get to. So that's number one. What do you want your life to look like without any inhibition? What does that actually look like? What does it feel like? That's even more important. So if you can feel what your dream life looks like and constantly have that in mind every single day, then your intention is going to start moving you in that direction. Your actions are going to start moving in that direction. And so that consistency is key for moving you out of the place that you're in currently.
It's something I talk about a lot because I used to be somebody who identified as a very inconsistent person. And that was something that I just had a hard time being consistent. And so I was like, I'm just not a consistent person. And so for anybody out here who's like, yeah, I'd like to be consistent, or I'd like to set these goals for myself or visit these visualizations or tap into that. Consistency is also a limiting belief or not a limiting belief. If you believe you're believe you're a consistent person, it's easier to become one. So I decided at one point that was no longer my story, and I was a consistent person, and I'm pretty fucking consistent at this point in my life. That is something that I'm like really good at, but I wouldn't have been able to say that years ago. And as long as I identified as somebody who wasn't consistent. So when Kelly's talking about these limiting beliefs and your nervous system, you have to really look at all of them. There's sneaky ones in there. There's ones that are like hiding and you don't even recognize that you have it until you start deconstructing it.
Absolutely.
So I think that's really important to mention, because if you're just somebody who's like super type B, consistency isn't my thing. that's fine, but do you want to change that story?
Yeah. And big thing is, how are you implementing the habits? If it feels like a job to implement the habits, the likelihood of you sticking with it is pretty slim. But if you incorporate it into your life that you're already doing, like if you have a cup of coffee every day, then add breath work onto that cup of coffee, so like stacking those habits onto things that are already anchored into your day are really the best way to do it. So if you do struggle with setting aside 10 minutes in the morning, incorporate it into your day and you're much more likely to do it. Or on a car drive, you have little moments throughout the day that you can do things that doesn't feel so daunting at first.
And also for perfectionistic, high achieving women, it's
Mhm.
okay to take 10 minutes to yourself.
Mhm.
Even if it's in your car, even if it's like staying up a little past the time the kids go to bed, even if it's waking up a little early, like creating 10 minutes to yourself. If we're talking about nervous system regulation and getting intentional about your life instead of just being a bystander of it, it's so vital that you deem yourself worthy enough of your own time.
100%. And it is about giving yourself permission. You need to give yourself permission for that. It's not a luxury, it's a necessity. And even if it is just 10 minutes, that is going to do wonders for moving yourself forward. It doesn't take a life overhaul to actually change your entire life. You just need to change little things and then that compounds.
Ugh. This is such a good conversation. I know there's so many people out there that need to hear this. One of the other things that you talk a lot about is like the subconscious
Mhm.
programming.
Mhm.
For somebody who feels extra stuck, could you elaborate on the subconscious and how that might be playing a role for them?
Yeah, absolutely. So our subconscious mind is really developed from ages 0 to 7. So everything that we've experienced in our life, there's some kind of programming that we're running on from those ages, because in those ages, we're mostly in this theta brainwave where we believe every single thing that we're told. So that's like why, children believe in Santa Claus at that time. That's why, my son says there's a Spinosaurus behind him. He thinks there's a Spinosaurus. But there's things that we hear, that we see, and it's coming from like our parents, our teachers, mainly people of authority that we are getting messages from. And we may not even realize we're getting messages from. It doesn't have to be this explicit thing. Like, I remember this happened when I was 4. Like, it can be these subtle messages, but we have this programming that literally dictates our life that has been there since we were a child. And unless we revisit that, it's going to keep on dictating the direction of our life. And it's like, we have our phones and we get the message to update our phone and we're immediately doing it. But yet we run on the same programming that we've had since we were a child, and wonder why our life is turning out the way it's turning out. So we have to start diving into that. And it is taking a moment of pause and recognizing, like, what are the things I'm saying to myself, and without judgment. So journaling is really big for that, and journaling without judgment, and recognizing the stories that you're telling yourself. What are some patterns you see in your life? How do you handle situations in your life? Really looking at some of these things and unraveling the story that has happened throughout your life. That's part of it. But also part of it is recognizing, where do you want to go? And that is all part of that reprogramming your subconscious mind. So if you can start recognizing that dream life, get yourself into a calm state, that meditative state. This has really been huge in my life, as being intentional with meditation, not just sitting and recognizing thoughts, which is great, but also being intentional and allowing myself to almost experience what my dream life would be like before I'm there. And that starts to change our thoughts, it changes our emotions, and actually changes our physical well-being, because that's all interconnected. So one is having the awareness of the stories. 2 is being intentional where we want our stories to go, and being consistent with that starts to rewire the brain, reprogram the brain, and change how we're behaving in our life.
One of the things that you've said repeatedly over this conversation is non-judgmental.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to amplify that point, is that when you start to like look at and get really honest, like if we loop back all the way to the beginning of this conversation, if you start getting really honest with yourself about what's not working in your life or what you really believe in your life, you have to approach it almost from an observer standpoint of just, it's not good or bad, it just is. And the quicker we know it just is, and the quicker we can be in a space of, I accept that it just is this, and this is where I'm starting. And it doesn't mean I'm good or bad or hopeless or whatever. It has no meaning. It just is. if we can find that place of non-judgmental when we're looking at the limiting beliefs, when we're looking at the things that we feel stuck on, or our subconscious, or where our nervous system is at, or where our pain might be stemming from, if we can get really in that observer standpoint of, if this was my child, if this was my best friend, I wouldn't be like blaming, shaming, and beating them up. I would be like, okay, well, this is where we're starting. How do we want to get? Where else do we want to go? And if you can come at it from that place, then we're not stacking these emotions. The more emotions and anxieties and shame and guilt that we stack for having these honest thoughts and getting honest with ourselves, the harder it is to move out of it. You're just creating more layers of things to work through. So I love that point, and I love that you keep bringing that up, because when it all comes back to, if we even just start at the beginning of just getting in tune with your truth, you have to do it in a way that's loving and compassionate of everything you've been through, of every version that you've had to be, and of the coping skills that you've developed, not because you're bad, but because that's what you know, and that's what you've known up until this point. And so I want to emphasize that for anybody listening, that we're talking about these things coming from two people who work in this space now, but have worked in this space because of where we've come from. and the best way to move forward is with love of yourself and care of yourself and compassion in whatever regard you can meet yourself with.
Absolutely. Yeah. A big part of that is also that reframing and reconceptualizing. For me, I lived with that negativity for years. I guilted myself. Like, I wasted my 20s being, living with an eating disorder and back pain. Like, I was so angry at myself for wasting that time. But now I have reframed that to be like, that was such a gift. It really was, because it allowed me to connect with people on a deeper level. It's allowed me to help people who are struggling through things. So I've really taken that. And I think for anyone listening, if you can start taking some of your struggles in life, reframe them, and recognize how maybe they were perfectly placed in your life to help you move forward and become the best version of yourself, that's a game changer. It can be really hard in the minute. And when you're dealing with that, like, I did not feel that way when I was living with the eating disorder. But when you start to come out of it, ask yourself, how is this serving me? And you're going to start getting the right answers, the answers that are going to serve you in the long run, rather than like, why did this happen to me?
Yeah, there's this really great book by Marshawn Daniels Lynch called Believe Bigger. It's a little bit of a Christian theme for anybody who's not into that. But one of the things she talks about is disruption is the invitation. So when things go wrong, it's the invitation to get to know yourself deeper. And disruption unlocks the pieces of ourself that we need for our future. So I like to think of that too, of like, as these things have come up for you, or as these inconveniences or anxieties or experiences in your life have arisen, then you get a chance to know a different version of yourself, to know different parts of you that maybe you'll use in the future, maybe you'll use to help somebody else. And I really think that's a good portion of it, right? Is that once we figure out our own crap, it's our obligation and our duty to share what we know and what has worked for us to get us out of a dark spot to help others. So yeah, I love this. How can people work with you? I know they're going to want to work with you, help get their nervous system regulated and all of that good stuff.
Yeah, so you can find me on socials under Dr. Kelly Kessler. I'm also on my website, optimalu, healthandwellness.com, and give a lot of free resources through my podcast, Rewiring Health. So those are probably the best avenues to find me.
Awesome. And I will drop all the links in the show notes. I'm so grateful for you. This was such a great conversation. I know it's going to impact a lot of people.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.